Today's video is sponsored by Incogni, of whom more in a little bit. When I made my recent video on facts about the Croydon trams, I discovered that I had no footage of Avenue Road, the least used tram stop. Because I like to make my life as difficult as possible, I decided that I had to go out there and get some footage for the 3 seconds or so that I would be talking about it. Which seems a long way to go for very little, so now you're getting a video about Avenue Road. So as I say, Avenue Road is the least popular tram stop on the entirety of the London tram network. I always think London trams sounds weird given that the network is mostly concentrated in southeast London, and there are no solid plans to extend it anytime soon. Nevertheless, that is where we are. It's on the branch to Beckenham Junction and is actually in Beckenham. It's located on Avenue Road, actually bisecting the road. Avenue Road might be the most generic name for a public transport stop I have ever heard. Like, Avenue Road? Is that in Suburb Town? Now, I've talked in the past about how much of the tram system is made up of recycled railway lines. And the line to Beckenham Junction is no exception, but in a somewhat curious way. To understand this line, we need to go to Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace was a massive glass house constructed in Hyde Park to house the Great Exhibition of 1851. This was a massive success, and a number of business folk thought maybe they could repeat the magic by moving the building to South London. Among the business folk involved in this were two directors of the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway who, not coincidentally, ran trains through South London. The rebuilt palace reopened on this new site in 1854. It was basically a kind of theme park or entertainment complex. Naturally, the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway assumed this would be a gold mine. They built a short branch from Sydenham to the station we now know as Crystal Palace, which also opened in 1854. But an independent company came along with a proposal for another line. This company was known as the West End of London and Crystal Palace Railway. Obviously, Crystal Palace was going to be enormously popular forever, and so of course the market would support another line. The backers of the company had also noticed something else. The railways of South London came into London at London Bridge, in the east. A line running into the West End, using the London and South Western Railway's terminus at Waterloo, could in theory open up a whole untapped market. Speaking of marketing, do you ever get creeped out by those weird targeted adverts? Are you overwhelmed by spam emails? Here's an idea. Check out this video's sponsor, Incogni. See, when you're browsing the internet, websites are collecting your data and building up a profile of you, which they can sell to data brokers. That is, if they don't have their own security breach first. Either way, someone's got your data that shouldn't have it, and that leaves you open to everything from spam emails to identity theft. Fortunately for you, Incogni offers a solution. You see, legally, all those websites and data brokers have to delete your data when asked. But of course, they don't make it easy. And if you're anything like me, you can't even remember half the websites you visited in the first place. Incogni does the legwork for you. Simply sign up, authorize them to act on your behalf, and they will automatically send out all those requests for you. They keep you updated with regular progress reports. I was, frankly, amazed/horrified to learn how many people had my data. And I've noticed an enormous reduction in the number of spam emails I get. If you too would like to not be hassled by randos or freaking out about identity theft, use the code HAZARD at the link in the description below, which is also appearing now on screen, to get 60% off an annual plan and take back control. Speaking of control, let's get back to the West End of London and Crystal Palace Railway's attempts to get into someone else's station. When it opened in 1856, the West End of London and Crystal Palace Railway ran from Wandsworth in south-west London to Crystal Palace. Unfortunately, the London and South Western Railway weren't interested in letting anyone else into Waterloo. Instead, the line would be operated, again, by the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. Since they weren't going to get trains into Waterloo, the WEL and CPR built a station in Battersea, which they called Pimlico, even though it wasn't in Pimlico. But there was more to come. The company intended to extend further out towards Farnborough. There's a lot of complicated railway politics here, but the long and short of it, for the purposes of our video, is that in 1858 an extension opened to Shortlands via Beckenham Junction. And that is the line that Avenue Road sits upon. Now, even before the line was built, its promoters were starting to get cold feet. They attempted to solicit donations from the landowners around here to get the thing built. The fact of the matter was that the area was not very inhabited at all, and didn't look like it was going to be any time soon. The London, Brighton and South Coast refused to run trains over the extension. The WEL and CPR were legally obliged to run something though, so they bought an ancient tank engine and 4 elderly coaches. Ironically, these were cast-offs from the LBSC. This rather sad little train shuttled back and forth between Shortlands and Crystal Palace 17 times a day. The line was never especially well used. No one really expected it to be, and in any case, the ensuing years would see several other competing railways operating in the vicinity. The railways of South London were an absolute mess, and to some extent they still are. Companies built lines wherever they could in the hope of beating their rivals, but only succeeded in asphyxiating themselves. Dogs fighting over a bone with very little meat on it. In 1923, the WEL and CPR, the LBSC, the LSWR and all those other squabbling railways of South London were absorbed into the Southern Railway. Obviously this eliminated competition, but it also brought innovation. The LSWR had begun the successful process of electrifying their suburban lines, which allowed them to run more and faster trains, and attracted more passengers. The Southern figured that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and began electrifying other lines around London. The line between Beckenham Junction and Crystal Palace gained its third rail in 1929. Unfortunately, even though suburban development had begun around here in earnest, the service was not much better. It was poorly timetabled. Trains didn't connect with other services at Beckenham, meaning passengers using the Crystal Palace line were liable to have a long wait. There was also a bus service, and at this time car ownership was becoming more common, so the directors of the Southern Railway seemed to have given up on the idea of making this line worthwhile. Passengers pleaded for a service that ran on from Beckenham Junction to East Croydon, but the company argued that the line from East Croydon was crowded with other services. In other words, the residents along the Crystal Palace line were not a priority. In 1948, the railways were nationalised. This did not lead to improvements. If anything, the service got worse. British railways tended to operate on the basis that if a line wasn't popular, it wasn't worth investing in. This created a sort of vicious circle. Less investment meant a worse service, so fewer passengers, so less justification for investment, and so forth. By 1983, things had become so bad that the line through here was reduced from double track to single, meaning that only one train could operate over the line at a time. Well, this turned out to be extremely short-sighted. The 80s saw an increase in people travelling into London by train, partly due to economic growth, particularly in the London-based financial sector, but partly because the services were improved. Trains were rerouted and re-timetabled exactly as locals had requested more than 50 years previously. In 1988, the Thameslink service opened, offering trains directly into the city. But the Crystal Palace line was not in a position to take advantage of that. It wasn't really possible to add more trains onto a single line, and relaying the old track and rebuilding the old stations was prohibitively expensive. But there was an alternative. In the 1990s, momentum was building for the reintroduction of trams into London. The sad story of this unloved line had been repeated on other lines around South London. At this time, Croydon and its surrounds were suffering from traffic congestion, partly because the railways serving it were rubbish, or closed, or in the case of New Addington, had never existed in the first place. So a plan was devised. The streets of Croydon would regain their trams. Outside of Croydon, the trams would take over closed or little-used lines. Being a form of light rail, trams are less expensive to run than conventional trains. One of the branches proposed would be laid in the place of the removed track to Beckenham Junction, running alongside the single railway line. Surprisingly, there was a lot of local opposition to the trams coming here. This is partly why Beckenham Junction tram stop is not in Beckenham Junction station, as is the case at Wimbledon and Elmer's End. Trams could provide a different kind of service, what we might call little and often. Small vehicles running frequently, the better to serve the kind of passenger market that exists here. This little and often philosophy also extends to the stops. There was never a railway station at Avenue Road, nor would there ever have been enough passengers to justify it. With the tram stops, simple low platforms with no shelters and no staff, it's a much more economically attractive proposition. In order to provide the often part of that little and often service, there have had to be passing loops installed at the stops. In other words, doubling of the track so one tram can pass another while it waits in the platform. So the track bed has had to be widened here. That being done, Avenue Road could Avenue Tram Stop. As for the little part, well, Avenue Road sees the fewest passengers of any stop on the London trams, a little over 100,000 a year. Which admittedly isn't bad on a countrywide basis, but isn't many for London. The area consists of residential streets, not super dense, and the stop itself isn't exactly central. There's a service approximately every 10 minutes, so while it might not be the most popular rail stop in the world, these things are very relative. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the passing loop to my frequent service. I would also like to thank Incogni. Check out the link in the description below to take advantage of their generous offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.